Darkness enveloped the desolate planet like a shroud, and the air was thick with a gloomy, corrosive atmosphere. My name is Inquisitor Theron Valius, and my duty was to investigate signs of corruption among the highest echelons of imperial power. In the 41st millennium, humanity constantly struggled against the darkness, but this mission turned into a nightmare beyond imagination. Exidius Prime was a ruin, a place that had seen better days before the war, and heresy had reduced it to a womb of rubble. Accompanied by a team of inquisitorial adepts, I ventured into the bowels of a long-forgotten city, where ancient buildings seemed to mourn the lament of the dead. The faint cries of the wind through shattered windows felt like whispers of the damned, echoing across the empty streets.
"Inquisitor, do you feel it?"
whispered Adept Harlan, his voice trembling.
"The air, it's wrong. I have a bad feeling. Something here is not right."
"Focus, Harlan," I replied curtly. "Darkness feeds on fear. Fortify your mind, or it will consume you." My objective was clear. Investigate the dominant political faction, a cabal that operated in shadows and thrived on the suffering of its citizens. But as is often the case, the thirst for knowledge leads to horror, and I soon discovered that heresy had roots deeper than I could have imagined. As we ventured deeper into the silent streets of Exidius Prime, every step seemed to echo unnaturally. The windows of the houses were veiled with tattered drapes, and the buildings, once symbols of glory, now stood as hollow shells haunted by a malevolent wind. It felt as though the city itself was breathing, an agonized entity watching our every move. The further we advanced, the more I felt the weight of unseen eyes, cold and relentless. My team and I found ourselves in an ancient palace, once the heart of political power. The walls were adorned with paintings depicting tales of glorious heroes, now faded like the hopes of this beleaguered city. As we stepped into the palace, a shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just the decaying magnificence of the place, but an indescribable presence that seemed to permeate the very walls. The air was heavy, almost viscous, and every corner concealed secrets. Every corridor felt like a labyrinth designed to trap us for eternity. While examining an ancient archive, I discovered a forbidden document, a secret treaty with the forces of chaos. The parchment seemed to shift in my hands, as though it were alive, and the words burned into my mind like a searing brand.
"By the throne,"
gasped Harlan, peering over my shoulder.
"This can't be. They made a pact."
"It's worse than that," I replied grimly, my fingers tracing the heretical seal at the bottom of the document. "They sold their souls for power, and now the entire planet will pay the price." Betrayal unfolded before my eyes. The city's leaders had struck a dark pact, sacrificing the soul of their people in exchange for power and prosperity. A wave of disgust washed over me, but my mission demanded that I press on, even if it meant confronting the horror I had just uncovered. In the shadows, my team and I discovered a hidden passage leading to an underground crypt. Here, at the throbbing heart of heresy, stood an altar stained with blood and surrounded by symbols of chaos. The truth was undeniable. The city was a nest of corruption, and betrayal lurked among its highest echelons. The walls of the crypt seemed alive, with veins of warp energy snaking beneath their surface. As we explored the crypt, smoking candles cast an eerie glow on a circle of pyres, revealing hooded figures whispering ancient mantras. These were the city's leaders, traitors cloaked in the darkness of chaos. In that instant, the room's temperature plummeted, and I saw the figures undulating in the air, possessed and poised for utter blasphemy.
"Inquisitor, they're summoning something!"
Harlan shouted, bolter raised.
"Hold the line! Don't let their ritual be completed!"
I commanded, stepping forward with my rosarius faintly glowing.
"If they succeed, it will be nothing but bitter ruin."
The battle that followed was a macabre dance between the Inquisition and the servants of chaos. The city's leaders, once respectable figures, were now deformed denizens of a twisted realm. Flames flickered and blades clashed against forbidden powers. The growing chaos, fueled by betrayal, threatened to consume all that remained of Exidius Prime. In the midst of the battle, the weight of the heresy around me grew almost unbearable. The flames of the candelabras flared higher, fed by a violet energy, while the screams of our enemies intertwined with the roaring fury of the warp. A massive column collapsed mere steps away, sending a wave of dust and debris cascading through the crypt. My adepts fought with desperate ferocity, yet their cries of defiance turned to agonized screams as they fell, one after another. Amid the chaos, I felt the pernicious, ruinous call of chaos slithering into my mind. Visions of boundless power and forbidden knowledge unfolded before me, their allure almost irresistible. But I clenched my resolve, pushing the temptation away with every ounce of my faith and willpower. For a moment, reality itself shattered. I found myself suspended in a cosmic void, surrounded by twisted figures engulfed in living flames. Their faces were a grotesque mosaic of despair and hatred, their voices reverberating as a mournful chorus. An enormous, indistinct figure loomed before me, its eyes glowing with a crimson radiance that seemed to pierce my soul.
Theron Valius,
it whispered.
Your sacrifice is not required, only your allegiance to true power.
The temptation was palpable, an almost physical pull, but my faith anchored me.
I will not yield to your lies,
I roared, gripping my bolter with renewed determination and firing into the frenzied mass of enemies. Suddenly, the air erupted with a deafening roar, and the ground beneath my boots trembled violently. A chaos creature, summoned by the blasphemous ritual, materialized within the circle of pyres. Its form was a writhing mass of tentacles and burning eyes, each orb glowing with an infernal light that seared the mind. Adept Harlan screamed as the monstrosity lunged forward, its claws carving deep trenches into the stone floor.
Fall back to the crypt entrance,
I commanded, my voice cutting through the chaos. I knew the battle was already lost.
We cannot die here. Our knowledge must reach the Sacred Inquisition.
The battle reached its zenith, but the horror of the abomination proved insurmountable. As my adepts fell one by one, I felt the grip of chaos tighten around me. The creature let out a dissonant scream, and the world around us warped, revealing a chaotic dimension of incomprehensible madness.
It's not real,
Harlan muttered, his voice breaking as the landscape twisted into lunacy.
It's the warp. It's inside our minds.
Moments later, the crypt began to collapse, threatening to become our tomb. The sibilant whispers of chaos grew more insistent.
Theron Valius, you have seen the truth. Your Imperium is fragile, your Emperor is fragile, but you are not. You are no weak servant. Join us, and I will show you true power.
For a fleeting moment, I hesitated. What if the Imperium wasn't enough? What if chaos was the only way to survive? But then the memory of my fallen adepts burned through my hesitation, like a cleansing fire.
Never,
I growled, gripping my Rosarius tightly.
Faith is not weakness. It is the strongest weapon I possess, and it will destroy all your lies.
Reality snapped back into focus. The crypt lay in ruins, the flames of the altar and pyres dying out. The chaos creature had vanished, but the price of betrayal had been paid with the blood of the innocent. Exidius Prime was condemned by its greed and corruption, its fate sealed by the heretical pact of its leaders. And so, as my team and I left the desolate planet, I knew my battle against chaos would not end here. Beneath the blackened sky of that forsaken world, I wondered how many other cities in the Imperium harbored the same darkness, how many other leaders had traded their humanity for the illusion of power. Betrayal was a plague that wormed its way into the hearts of the Imperium, and my inquisitorial mission would continue to seek out and annihilate heresy, even if it meant confronting the growing evil of the 41st millennium. The war against chaos was not only fought with bolters and blades, it was waged in the depths of the soul, a perpetual battlefield within a man's very being. The warp swallowed us whole, a maelstrom of swirling energies that twisted reality itself. My name is Sergeant Arion Voss, and I led my squad of Space Marines into the heart of the void. We were on a mission assigned by the Adeptus Astartes to investigate a disturbance in the Immaterium that threatened to spill its corruption into real space. Our drop pod hurtled through the fractured barriers of reality, and when we emerged, we found ourselves in a realm that defied all logic. The colors were beyond comprehension, belonging to neither the visible nor the invisible spectrum. Our visors struggled to process them, as if reality itself rejected their chromatic existence. The geometry was impossible, shapes folded into themselves in ways that made no sense, shifting as if space itself had forgotten how to remain constant. The air thrummed with discordant vibrations, a sound without a source, an endless, wavering frequency that never found equilibrium. Sometimes it was rising, sometimes fading, but it was always wrong. Even the stars, if they could be called such, were not mere celestial bodies. They loomed in the abyss like watchful eyes, expanding and contracting in unnatural patterns. Perhaps they were alive. Perhaps they were waiting. The squad moved in tight formation, bolters at the ready.
We are Space Marines, the Emperor's finest. Forged in the fires of war, trained to resist fear, to stand unwavering against the horrors of the galaxy. Our minds are fortified with faith. Our bodies enhanced beyond human limits. We do not falter.
Even for us, the warp was a place of unsettling uncertainty, a realm where no amount of training or strength could grant absolute certainty. It was not fear that gnawed at us, but something more insidious, a whisper of doubt, a question unspoken. The objective was simple: find the source of the disturbance and eliminate it. But as we ventured deeper into the shifting labyrinth, a creeping unease settled over us. Voices murmured in the recesses of our helmets, speaking of forgotten nightmares and ancient horrors. Brother Darian called over the Vox.
Sergeant, the warp. It's pressing in. It feels like it's alive.
Keep your focus, brother,
I replied sharply.
The Emperor's light guides us. Do not let this place break your resolve.
The first sign that something was amiss came when Brother Garin, our heavy weapons specialist, began to mutter incoherently. His eyes darted around as if following unseen specters, and his fingers twitched on the trigger of his heavy bolter. I ordered him to pull himself together, but the warp had already sunk its claws into his mind. As we pressed on, the very fabric of reality seemed to warp and twist around us. The corridor we traversed elongated and contracted, playing tricks on our perceptions. Shadows danced in the corners of our vision, and the air grew thick with a palpable malevolence. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, pulsing with an unholy rhythm that matched the whispers in our minds. We were no longer in control of our destiny. The warp held us in its suffocating grip. Brother Garen's mutterings grew louder, more deranged. He spoke of demons and forbidden knowledge, his words a mad litany that echoed through the squad's Vox channels. I could feel the unease spreading like a contagion among my brothers, a creeping sense of dread that threatened to tear apart the bonds of brotherhood that held us together.
Sergeant Voss, they're here, watching us, waiting for us,
whispered Brother Garen, his voice trembling for the first time ever. I couldn't believe it. It couldn't be fear. But could it be madness? Could one of us truly fall?
Enough!
I barked, stepping in front of him.
This is the warp's trickery. You are a space marine. You will not falter.
But even as I spoke, I could see the doubt etched into his face, the seeds of corruption already taking root. As we reached a cavernous chamber, the source of the disturbance revealed itself, an ancient artifact full of warp energies. The air shimmered around it, and the whispers grew into agonized screams. Brother Garen fell to his knees, his hands clutching his helmet as if trying to block out the voices that assailed him.
By the Emperor.
Brother Darian muttered, his voice barely audible.
This is no relic. This is a curse.
I ordered the squad to destroy the artifact, to purge it with holy fire. But as we raised our weapons, the immaterium itself retaliated. Nightmarish entities emerged from the shifting shadows, their forms ever-changing and grotesque. The squad opened fire, bolter rounds tearing through the warp-spawned abominations, but for everyone we felled, another took its place. As the battle raged, the whispers from the artifact grew louder, now deafening in my mind. The air seemed to vibrate with its dark will, and I felt my strength falter.
Sergeant Voss,
Came a low, distorted voice, clear amidst the chaos. I turned to see Brother Kale, his helmet cracked, his eyes glazed as if staring into an infinite abyss.
The Emperor's light. It's gone. We're already dead, Sergeant. Why fight it?
Brother, listen to me.
I shouted over the din of bolter fire and demonic screams.
You are a space marine. We do not yield, not to despair and not to the warp.
But his gaze did not meet mine. He clutched his bolter to his chest like a penitent holding a relic.
They speak the truth,
He murmured.
The warp is all there is.
Before I could stop him, Kale stepped toward the artifact, his movement slow but unwavering, as if pulled by an unseen force.
Brother Kale, no!
I roared, but it was too late. His form disintegrated before my eyes, consumed by the artifact's energy, his final scream merging with the unholy chorus that filled the chamber. In the chaos of battle, Brother Garen tore off his helmet, revealing eyes that glowed with an unholy light. His once proud face contorted into a rictus of madness as he uttered dark incantations in a language not meant for mortal tongues. The warp had claimed him, body and soul.
Brother Garen, fight it!
I shouted, my bolter aimed at his chest.
You are one of us. You are a servant of the Emperor.
The Emperor?
Garen hissed, his voice distorted.
The Emperor has no power here. Only the immaterium is eternal.
The squad fought valiantly, but the warp was a relentless adversary. Reality itself began to fray at the edges, its fabric unraveling like a tattered shroud. I felt the corruption seeping into my mind, insidious and persistent, whispering forbidden truths that threatened to unmake me. I fought to hold on, to my sanity, to my duty, to resist the warp's seductive promises. One by one, my brothers fell. Their screams echoed in the twisted corridors. Brother Darian fell last, his voice a prayer to the Emperor even as the shadows consumed him.
We die as his servants,
He whispered, his words carrying a faint glimmer of hope before silence claimed him. I stood alone, surrounded by the remnants of a squad that had descended into the abyss. The artifact still pulsed with corrupted energy, a beacon of the warp's malevolence. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of torment.
Sergeant Voss,
The voices cooed.
you have seen the truth. The warp is infinite. Join us, and we will give you the power to remake your broken Imperium.
For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. Visions of glory and dominion danced before my eyes. But then the faces of my fallen brothers came to me, their sacrifice a shield against the darkness.
No, I will not betray them.
I growled, gripping my bolter. In a final act of desperate defiance, I unleashed the full firepower of my bolter upon the artifact. The chamber shook, and a blinding light enveloped everything. When the brilliance faded, I found myself back in real space, the warp's tendrils releasing their grip on my soul. I stood amidst the ruins of my squad, the stench of burnt ozone and the acrid taste of failure in the air. The artifact was destroyed, but at a terrible cost. I, Sergeant Arion Voss, was the lone survivor, condemned to carry the memories of my squad's descent into madness. As I made my way back to the extraction point, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of the warp. The whispers lingered, faint but insistent, a haunting chorus that would forever remind me of the price we paid in the void. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred, and I, a space marine of the Imperium, had become a reluctant witness to the true horror that lurked within the warp. An unnatural energy seemed to permeate the air, something different from the familiar hum of machines. The young tech priest Arcane felt the shift, a tremor running through his remaining flesh and implanted circuits. A cold dampness filled the hangar, despite the constant activity of reactors and generators. He paused for a moment, his mechadendrites twitching, as a distant voice seemed to whisper in the darkest binary he had ever heard. Arcane recalled his early training in the forges of Styges Octarius. The machine spirit had been described as a benevolent entity, a fragment of the Omnissiah guiding and protecting the servants of the Imperium. The prayers and liturgical chants of his apprenticeship still echoed faintly in his mind, a distant memory from a time when he had believed unquestioningly in the doctrine. And yet, even then, there had been whispers of rebellious spirits, entities that refused the blessing of faith. Legends, a superior had once told him, tales conjured by the weak to justify their failures. The machine spirit responds only to discipline and devotion. Now, standing before the Thunderhawk, Arcane wondered if those legends contained a sliver of truth. He felt his faith falter under the weight of the inexplicable. The teachings of the Mechanicus spoke of harmony between man and machine, but the thing now infesting this vessel was anything but harmonious. It was a parasite, a desecration of the sanctity of code. The Thunderhawk didn't respond immediately to his efforts. Its lights remained off, its body cold and lifeless. Yet, deep within its cybernetic mind, Arcane sensed resistance, a refusal that didn't solely belong to the machine spirit. It was as if a shadow had crept into the circuits, an aberrant presence distorting every whisper of code. His enhanced eyes flickered, revealing irregular streams of data cascading through his vision. Strange symbols, unrecognizable even to the Mechanicus archives, flashed amidst the sacred binary. They pulsed with an erratic rhythm, making Arcane's remaining organic eye water. He held his breath as a faint scent of burnt incense filled the air, though none had been lit. It was as if the hangar itself had exhaled something ancient and hostile.
Machine spirit,
Arcane whispered uncertainly, sending soothing data pulses.
reveal yourself. Speak to me.
Instead of a response, he heard a hiss, a screeching sound that seemed to originate within his own mind.
I've seen you, little servant.
The voice said. It didn't belong to the Thunderhawk. It belonged to no one. The shadows in the hangar shifted, bending reality for a moment too long. For an instant, Arcane thought he saw a figure, a skeletal silhouette with glowing eyes, standing at the edge of the hangar. When he blinked, it was gone. but the echo of its presence lingered, an oppressive weight pressing on his chest. Arcane shook his head, trying to focus on his task. With trembling hands, he brought a servo wrench to the main engine. At his touch, a jolt of energy surged through his mechanical arm. It wasn't just a defensive response, it was punishment. Resting his hand, Arcane attempted to initiate a purification cycle, reciting an ancient litany of correction. His mechadendrites moved with precision, attempting to input and override manually.
Sacred engine,
He murmured.
accept my touch and let yourself be guided to redemption.
At first, it seemed to work. The Thunderhawk trembled slightly, its systems rebooting, and a faint hum filled the air. But almost immediately, the hum shifted into a low, sinister groan. The hangar lights began to flicker, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Suddenly, the main mechanism convulsed. A burst of scalding steam erupted from a nearby conduit, hurling Arcane backward. He crashed into a pile of tools that clattered noisily to the floor.
Attention. Critical anomaly detected. System integrity compromised. Unauthorized presence identified.
One of the Thunderhawk's monitors blinked, but the letters warped, twisting into symbols no Mechanicus language was ever meant to contain. His mechadendrites recoiled, sensing danger, but Arcane did not relent.
Acknowledge your servant, Sacred Engine.
He shouted, his voice trembling with both desperation and defiance as he struggled to his feet.
I am Arcane, sworn devotee of the Omnissiah, chosen to guide and protect your essence. By the sacred scrolls of the Mechanicus and the eternal wisdom of the Omnissiah, I implore you to awaken. Cast out this corruption that seeks to desecrate your purity and hear the voice of your loyal servant. Respond to me, Sacred Engine, or let your silence shatter the bond between flesh and machine, dooming us both.
This time, the Thunderhawk answered, but not in the way Arcane had hoped. Its frame vibrated violently, emitting a guttural roar that filled the hangar. The lumens on the vessel activated, but not with their usual amber glow. Instead, an intense spectral red flooded the space, casting shadows that seemed alive. The binary code Arcane had input began to return, but it was chaotic and unnatural. The lines of sacred language fractured into grotesque verses and blasphemous words. The sounds emanating weren't mechanical. They were organic, primal. Arcane froze, paralyzed by fear. Slowly, he turned, feeling as though invisible eyes were watching him, their gaze piercing his armor and flesh alike. A voice echoed through the craft's vox, distorted and dripping with malice.
Your prayers are meaningless, Tech Priest. You are no savior. You are next.
The Tech Priest attempted to react, sending a full disconnect impulse, but it was too late. The Thunderhawk rose a few centimeters off the ground, one wing tilting to crash into a nearby wall, yet it didn't stop. Its engines vibrated on the verge of collapse, accelerating and stalling in a rhythm that almost seemed to speak. Laugh, even. Arcane stumbled backward, tripping over a discarded servo skull that emitted a distorted vox chant as it rolled away. The Thunderhawk's laughter deepened, and the hangar seemed to twist around it, the walls stretching and warping like molten iron.
Faith will not save you.
The voice taunted, now coming from all directions at once. With a cry, Arcane grabbed the sacred seal hanging around his neck and pressed it against the Thunderhawk's hull, reciting an exorcism litany. The binary began to flow again, but the sound persisted. The shadows thickened, closing in, and within them, Arcane saw something he wished he hadn't. Faces. Dozens, hundreds of tormented faces, men and women who were once alive, their souls trapped in the machine's eternal cycle.
Help us,
They whispered, their eyes devoid of hope. The The Thunderhawk stopped abruptly, releasing a final static hiss. Its lumens extinguished, plunging the hangar into an unnatural silence. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was the kind that follows a predator's retreat, not its defeat. Arcane stood frozen, the seal still clutched in his hand. He dared not approach the vessel again. It was repaired, yes, but the cost had been steep. Something dark now dwelled within it, something that belonged neither to the machine nor the Imperium. As he left the hangar, a thought haunted him. It wasn't just melancholy that weighed on him, but the realization that war wasn't the only horror. There were things hidden in the depths of metal and code, things that should never have been awakened. And as he reached the threshold, he heard it once more, a faint chuckle from the Thunderhawk, as if mocking him for daring to believe the ritual was truly over.